And will it change screens? Okay, so ULIC has 4 mandates. The first one is to advocate for Ukrainian language education across all jurisdictions. That's local, provincial, regional, national, and international. Second, to develop and support the development of learning resources for teachers and students. And by this, we mean high quality professional level learning resources. Third is to provide professional learning for teachers. And finally, to engage in research relating to language education. And today's presentation actually touches upon all 4. So if you would like to learn more about ULIC, look at its newsletters, some of the resources that we created, some of our research webinars, please feel free to use this QR code and enjoy. The ULIC team consists of myself as director, research coordinator Dr. Maria Ostrocha, research assistant Dr. Oksana Budkovska, and we receive regular contributions and consultations with Dr. Alena Deshkivska, Dr. Uliana Pizamecka, and Nadia Prokopchuk. So today what I propose to do is give you a little bit of context for the study, the methodology that was used, identify changes in Ukrainian language education systems since the Russian invasion, give examples, recommendations, and engage in a discussion with your questions and comments. So a little bit of background. As you probably know, according to Canada's 2016 census, about 1.36 million people identified themselves as being of Ukrainian descent. That's 4% of our population. 27% of those reported Ukrainian as their mother tongue. About 112,000 Ukrainians came to Canada after 1991 and up until 2016 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. An additional 300,000 individuals, mostly women and children, have been approved to enter through the CUAET program since Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. This sudden arrival of these Ukrainian migrants has influenced the dynamics of Ukrainian heritage language community schools, or Ridni Shkoly, which began with the very first wave of Ukrainian immigration in the late 19th century. And these schools have been located across the country and have been revitalized with new perspectives with each of the 6 waves of immigration to Canada. The methodology that was used for this study is what we call a mixed methods. It means that it had both quantitative data and qualitative data. For the quantitative survey, we had 38 teachers respond, and that was in late 2022, early 2023. I'm sure that if we circulated the survey again, which we might do, we would have more respondents. The study was approved for ethics by the University of Alberta, and the survey was also used to solicit interviews. The data is all confidential and anonymous, and some comparative data that I used I collected in a study in 2016 with 42 teachers is used occasionally to help us gauge some of the changes in the teacher population. The second part of the study is qualitative. Again, this was ethics approved, and it consists of interviews. We conducted interviews, about 103 hours of interviews with 12 teachers in 22, 23, 20 and 24, and 31 in 2025. Again, all data is confidential and anonymous. The findings, I would say that the interviews support the findings of the survey and deepen our understanding of the change that is taking place in the Ukrainian community in Canada. So in about 2021, you could say that community schools, our Ukrainian heritage Ridni Shkoly, existed where the pink dots are on this map. Now, In 2022, the NUEC website of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress identified the following schools, adding more schools in Alberta, BC, new schools in New Brunswick, Newfoundland, and PEI, where schools had never existed, and an increase in schools in Quebec. However, that quickly became outdated because more and more families arrived from Ukraine. By asking teachers what grades they teach, we find that the majority of teachers, 68%, are teaching children who are in grades 3 to 6. And so you could say, as we look at the map with all of the new schools that have emerged, and these aren't all of them, but you can see the change, that these schools are catering primarily to children 5 to 12 years of age. And not only is there an increase in the number of schools, many are small schools, less than 20 students, which suggests that a number of families who arrived in a certain area have gathered together to create a new school. And also, however, in larger urban centers, there is an increase in the number of students. So just on Sunday, I attended the Ridni Shkoly concert in Edmonton, and there are 256 students in that Ridni Shkoly. And in fact, the numbers are so large for the facility that they have a morning school and an afternoon school. The approximate ages of students in schools, according to the teachers who completed the survey, are as follows. And you can see that the vast majority are in the ages 7 to 12. For school size, as I've just mentioned, there has been an increase in large schools, i.e. schools becoming larger, but also there is an increase in small schools, probably in new communities. Class size is something that emerged as a challenge, both on the survey and from the teacher interviews. And just to give you an idea, in the study I conducted in 2016, half of the teachers reported that the average class size was 16 to 20 students. Since then, in 2023, that number has especially increased from 21 to 30. And I think this is what teachers are really concerned about. Now, the age of the participants, that is, of the teachers who participated in the study, has also changed. In 2016, the average age of the teachers was 40. The mean age was 35 to 44. And you can see the demographics in this chart. If we look at the other half of the screen, we can see that young teachers have decreased in proportion. The average age is 41.5. The mean age is 45 to 49. And we especially have more experienced teachers in our Ridni Shkoly. Now, a really important point that will come into the interpretation, the theoretical interpretation of the study, is where these teachers have completed their teacher training. So in 2016, about 58% of the Ridni Shkoly teachers had completed their training in Canada, and 31% a combination of Canada and Ukraine. And usually that means they started their studies in Ukraine and then they completed them in Canada. And only 12% in Ukraine alone. In 2023, only 34% had completed their studies in Canada, 11% in Canada and Ukraine, and 45% in Ukraine. Now, you might wonder why this is important, but if you think about approach to teaching, understanding of learning, the researchers who influence our thinking, how we teach literacy, the role of critical thinking, the role of problem solving, this, these kinds of differences are expressed through where teachers have been trained. Now, the number of years of teaching experience also differ. So in 2016, 25% of the teachers in our Ridni Shkoly had 0 to 6 years of experience, and 50% had over 15 years of experience. In 2023, 35% had less than 6 years of experience, and 56% over 15 years of experience. I want to point out that historically, it has been common for Ridni Shkoly to hire new immigrants from Ukraine whenever they arrive, whether they have a formal teaching background or not. It's always been perceived that this offers them work experience. It gives them an opportunity to work within our community and learn about the community. It helps them with immigrations and also with language skills. Just to tie together the instructor experience, teaching, and the teacher training, I just want to reinforce that more and more teachers then have not had training in Canada. And as we will see later, the influence, therefore, of how things are done in Ukraine is coming to Ridni Shkoly versus what used to happen is the influence of public school education on Ridni Shkoly. So what are the challenges to reaching the goals of community schools? The first three that were reported in 2023 were the larger class sizes, the greater gap of language proficiency among the students in classes. And of course, this is not surprising. Suddenly we had children who had just arrived from Ukraine and had very high level of proficiency relative to the heritage language speakers, and even children who were born in Canada, but from immigrant parents whose vocabulary would be much smaller because they don't get the same exposure in the environment to Ukrainian. But the third challenge, which was rather new, was the use of Russian. So it used to be that teachers would complain that, oh, the students use so much English. But now they noticed that there was the use of Russian. And of course, there were even families who did not use Ukrainian at all. This issue evolved over the 3 years of the study when teachers and sometimes teachers who were parents expressed frustration that parents would speak to the teacher in Ukrainian, indicating they could speak Ukrainian, but they would continue to speak Russian to their children. So this was a new issue faced in our Ridni Shkoly. A second one, which was seemed to be quite a surprise to the teachers, was poor literacy skills, even among or especially among children from Ukraine. They expected their level of reading, especially in the first year, to be that children would have in Ukraine, which wasn't the case. And that would also hold true for writing ability, speaking ability, and although listening comprehension was not something that was noticed to be a concern. Another concern, and I think this is a really important one, is the challenges of identity and belonging. Canadian-born teachers felt marginalized. One teacher wrote that it's challenging to feel like they have the right to teach Ukrainian school. Even though I hold an MA from OISE at the U of T, which is a primary institute recognized in Canada, has a high amount of cultural capital. And the thesis focused on Ukrainian community. There was a sense of otherness that this teacher reported from the staff. And the teacher said, it's as if I couldn't know what it means to be truly Ukrainian. This is a quote from the teacher, noting also that there are fewer and fewer Canadian-born teachers in Ukrainian schools. So as we probed this sense of identity and belonging in the interviews with administrators during the interview component, we found that frequently students were referred to as those born in Canada, from children from the first to third waves. The administrators did not see this as a concern at all. The administrators made comments such as, well, it's normal for people to find their own kind. Groups form based on where people come from, when, and the language they prefer to speak in. Another participant said, well, I don't speak English well. I have an accent, so I prefer to speak Ukrainian. English speakers might feel the same way. Raises the question, can choice of language act as an in and out group criteria for membership, for the feeling of belonging of teachers within the Ridni Shkoly? Another concern is what we could call the othering of children. So the way many teachers spoke, it's, well, you know, what can you expect from third, fourth born generation children in Canada? I think this is a concern because the process of categorizing people into a group, i.e. othering them, as fundamentally different also means as being inferior to one's own. And so what we're seeing within the Ridni Shkoly is this us versus them grouping. I should mention that when I presented this presentation at the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in Toronto in last month, a number of members of the audience definitely agreed with this statement. I think it's why this is of concern is not just for the sociological dimension, but the feeling that children have. And a reminder that children will respond to and reflect back to us our expectations and our opinions of them. And so if we treat them as if they're less able, they will become less able. If we're constantly reminding them that they're different, they will feel different. And this is, I think, a new phenomenon for the members of the Ridni Shkoly. The additional two challenges, one is the language benchmarks or standards are needed. And I think in this way, teachers from Ukraine can really bring something positive to our Ridni Shkoly. They come from public schools for the most part in Ukraine. They're used to having standards, and they want to have standards to which they strive and to which they assist students in striving. Such standards actually already exist if you think of the Common European Frame of Reference in language, but it is important also to create similar standards for areas of literature, geography, history, etc. So standards was repeatedly discussed in the first year and throughout the interviews thereafter. Now, in the third year of our interviews, teachers expressed a new concern. and that is that the children from Ukraine were losing their Ukrainian. Many of them mentioned that having Ukrainian school only once a week or only 3 times a week for 45 minutes was not enough to help them to sustain their language. And really, what's needed is what we would call family language planning or workshops within the school to help parents realize that this shift is occurring because very often it occurs without parents even being aware. Professional development was identified as a wish by many of the teachers. I found their comments quite interesting. These have been translated from Ukrainian. No one limits me in the way I see, for example, language teaching. No one came, however, to see whether it worked or not in my lessons. No one asked. So I would have liked more interest from the school principal, but it also would have motivated me a little more. We all need to be a little better in order to develop further. So this was what I meant by teachers from Ukraine, I think, going to be able to have a positive influence on our Ridni Shkoly. Another teacher wrote, you can arrange certain seminars for teachers and teach them something new. I had a lot of this in Ukraine. In fact, a lot of everything, cognitive, psychological, about how to work with children. It would be good if they explained to us how to work with such children, meaning children from Canada. Because here in Canada, I am guided only by my feelings. I do not know exactly how to work with children who were born in Canada, but by their roots, they are Ukrainians because it's actually not the same as in Ukraine. And another teacher talked about the feeling of a lack of some kind of systematicity and communication between everyone. Now, trauma did not come out strongly in the first year of the interviews, but it became stronger and stronger in the second and third year of the interviews. And I'll just discuss some of the examples that the teachers presented in describing children in their classrooms and how they actually would be considered trauma. Now, I do want to remind the audience that soon after the Russian invasion, UNICEF made the following guesstimate that more than half of all children in Ukraine were forced to leave their homes, and an estimated 7.5 million children were at risk of mental and physical health challenges because their basic needs were not being met in a war zone. Other researchers have noticed that they lack basic access to physical safety, shelter, food, and education. And mental challenges that can last into their subsequent adulthood are likely to be on a scale that has not been encountered since the Second World War, maybe especially so since the current media enables frequent and widespread replaying of the horror. So there's no doubt that the children and the families and the teachers are no doubt experiencing trauma, whether they're aware of it or not. But when teachers were asked, here are some of the things that in the first year they said, well, I can't say for sure, but I suspect that some of those who avoid communication may be experiencing such states of depression. I've tried to ask if anyone has had traumatic events, but of course children don't necessarily know how to talk about them, or that would be an event that would be considered traumatic. Another teacher said, I don't know how much of it is trauma because psychologists usually deal with this. But here are some examples that were shared. Sensitive topics. One teacher said, well, today I read a poem and a book about a Ukrainian grandfather. It was written by a Ukrainian from Canada, and I read it aloud. One girl said afterward, I had tears in my eyes because My grandfather is still in Ukraine. So I think this is a tough topic for a child because everyone makes those kinds of connections. Sounds. One teacher said the students who arrived last year are still a bit cautious. If a water bottle falls on the floor, they flinch, or if the bell rings between classes. One is from Kyiv, one from Mykolaiv. So, there were many drones and rockets overhead there. This year is a bit different. They are a bit better adjusted, and their trauma is less apparent. Lethargy. One teacher said he does speak, but I think he has severe depression. This has been the case since he arrived, which will be 2 years now. He has always been like this, doing nothing. His mother said it's a big problem. He just sits quietly. He's a very smart child because I see how he writes in science. He does write something, even though he doesn't open books or notebooks. He just sits. Now, interestingly, research that's been conducted on children from Ukraine in Europe also point to this common response, particularly for children in their teens. Stress. Teachers say it's stressful for the children because they have come into a completely different environment with a different language and without the friends they are used to. Children are under stress in any case. And again, drawing on the research from Europe, we see children in their teens having to learn a whole new system of education, having to figure out how they're going to live up to their own dreams of being able to go to university or some form of post-secondary education. And that definitely causes stress. Silence. One teacher said they don't talk about what happened in Ukraine. Unfortunately, some of them lived, for example, in Mariupol, in Donetsk. They traveled from Kharkiv to Kyiv, lived in Poland for 2 years, then in Toronto for half a year, and now here. I think it's hard for them, and they struggle. Aggression. One teacher said, we have a big problem with these newcomers. And I guess it's not just the Russian-speaking ones who talk in Russian in the corridors, but also the Ukrainians. There's a lot of bad language, curses. They just talk like that among themselves in the class. It's just awful. And of course, the students from Canada who might not know that language pick it up very quickly. There was fighting at the beginning, but teachers in the second and third year reported that that definitely had decreased. A second theme that emerged is parents navigating two-school system. It's normal for parents to expect what they and their children had in Ukraine. And it is challenging to adapt to a new school system. All of us know the resistance we have to change of any sort. And this forced change is no easier. But the most common theme was, why doesn't my child have homework? In Ukraine, they get 4 homework assignments every day. Why do they get different assignments in Canada? And interestingly enough, the research from Europe reports exactly the same thing. Parents focus on academics. They want their children to be successful and get good grades, and they want those good grades to translate into positive futures for their children. Teachers want the children from Ukraine in public schools to be able to, first of all, learn English and to have less stress, not to be as concerned about academics and grades and homework, but the teachers report having challenges conveying this to parents in a way that the parents can understand. So, of course, with parents being in their own struggles to survive, to support families, sometimes without husbands, the Ridni Shkoly have experienced an additional stress of not having parents as volunteers to support the schools. This was mentioned particularly in the interviews by teachers who've been in the Ridni Shkoly system for some time. Um, Parents also don't communicate with the schools, they don't communicate with the teachers. And so teachers are worried about their safety and are they depressed? But overall, we have to be able to point out teacher resilience and agency, the amazing commitment, the passion, the dedication to the education of children came through so strongly. Teachers are forever creative problem solving in the face of these new challenges. We should point out teachers' emotional labor and the insights we've learned from teachers. By emotional labor, we say what they express with a smile on their face versus what they're experiencing underneath. And it does make you wonder how long that can be sustained. Um, Another theme related to teacher resilience is teacher creativity. I was so impressed with some of the stories that they shared about building student identities and actually coping with trauma. One teacher described this. We did a project where we created a matchbox diagram. During the start of the war, children in a bomb shelter created this matchbox with the room of my dreams, which they could carry in their pockets and look at during alarms to think about something else. We adapted this idea and thought, we also need to teach something about empathy to help our students understand what it's like to be in a shelter. It was an opportunity for the students from Ukraine to share their experiences with others, and it made them feel comfortable. Um, I guess teacher resilience and agency regarding parents is another theme that emerged. Uh, and that is helping parents realize that there's a balance. We need to respect academics, but we need to help parents realize that they have to help their children cope and adjust and become good people and not remain depressed. So, what is really happening here? Can it be explained? And the answer is yes, at least in part. And here I turn to Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist and public intellectual, and his theory of habitus. So, habitus is, in a way, the taken for granted world that we learn while we're growing up, and that when someone asks us why something is the way it is, we often cannot answer. Uh, for example, if you're a native speaker of Ukrainian and someone says, well, why do you say this? You're not a teacher and you're not a linguist and you've not studied the language. Your answer is, I don't know, you just do. And that's part of this taken for grantedness. So a habitus has a number of characteristics. It is embodied, and that means I just know it. I know it's right. It's in me. It's ingrained in our posture, in our taste, in our speech. Many of you, I've heard many people look at someone and say, oh, they're from Ukraine. They're Ukrainian. How is it that you can know that? Okay. Again, it's just something that's in them, you could say. It's also an interplay of structure and agency. That means habitus is shaped by social class, by family, by influences, and this is learned in a loop, like in a dynamic loop. You try something. If it works, you keep doing it. If it doesn't work, you change until you find out what does work. Habitus is unconscious. For people within a habitus, they may think that it's natural or right, but in fact, it's more like normative or usual. In other words, if you go somewhere else and something is done, they also think it's natural or right, but it is in fact just normative and usual. Habitus is also socially reproduced. In other words, we teach our children, and we teach through individuals, through families, and through our community to repeat the things that we've learned. Of course, we like that situation when what we've learned is positive and works for us, but sometimes we are also reproducing certain kinds of inequalities. And it is based on integration of capital. And capital can be economic, it can be cultural, social, and symbolic. And it reflects our values. And this unconsciousness, again, is, well, we've always done it this way. So there's not necessarily a critique of things being able to be done a different way. So in order to belong or advance in a society, we have to learn and adopt the habitus. No one tells you this, really. It's kind of like the lessons you learn along your path in life. Now, habitus takes place on a field, and we're all participating in many fields at the same time. If you are trying to be a gymnast, then there's a field for gymnastics. If you're a soccer player, there's a field for soccer. If you're a teacher or a professional educator, there's a field for education. And every field has players, or we call them agents. And in every field, there's always new people entering the field. And there are also rules of the game that are called doxa. So in other words, in order to stay on the field, you need to learn how to play the game. You need to figure out how to get on the field, gain points, and what happens when you break the rules. If we think of this for education, for example, you know that you need to have a degree. Well, what are the requirements to get a degree? And then how do you get a job? And once you get a job, how do you get a permanent certificate? And once you have permanent certification, how do you advance within your profession through professional development? So within every field, there are rules or doxa, and there's capital at play that's helping you proceed or perhaps choose to abandon and not want to be on that field anymore. So, according to Bourdieu, a field is a structured social space that involves economic, cultural, social, symbolic capital, and there is a kind of logic that is taken for granted and not necessarily shared in order to progress. Now, what happens when we have overlapping fields in education? So in public education in Canada, as I've mentioned, we have ways of becoming a teacher, becoming a school principal, what the curriculum is, how it changes, and so on. And in our Ridni Shkoly, there is also a field, the same field of education, but the rules are a little bit different. How you progress is a little different than how you progress in public education. And these two fields overlap, of course. There are similarities and differences. We see that the public schools have content such as reading, writing, STEM, citizenship, whereas our Ridni Shkoly teach Ukrainian history, geography, literature, culture, language, and contributions of Ukrainians to Canada. The language of our public schools is English and perhaps another language. In our Ridni Shkoly, it's Ukrainian. The time that's allotted, 200 days per year, 13 years, 4 years of post-secondary education for public schooling, 3 hours per week per more or less 10 years in Ridni Shkoly. There are standards and expectations in public school, provincially mandated. There's accountability, professional monitoring, and there's accreditation. Now, I think we are working toward improvement in our heritage language schools. So, for example, in high schools, for the teaching of grades 10 to 12 or 9, the equivalent of 9 to 12, that is, if we have a certified teacher in our course, then students can receive high school credits for Ukrainian. At least that's the case in Alberta and in some other places. So now I return to public education in Canada. So we have a doxa, we have capital, how we enter the field, how we progress and advance within that field. And we who are from Canada know what those rules are. And the longer we're in the system and the more we work with newcomers, new teachers in the system, not necessarily from another country, the more we have to articulate how it is that they will be able to participate in this field of education, how they will gain capital. Well, the same thing exists for public education in Ukraine. Only the rules of the game are different. What teachers need to do to get into the field is a little different. Not better or worse, but different. And what is happening is that the teachers from Ukraine are coming with this understanding of the game into the Ridni Shkoly, and the teachers who've been in the Ridni Shkoly for some time are coming with this understanding of Ridni Shkoly. And so we've got a little bit of a conflict, you could say. I'll just point out one example that I've heard frequently and that has been reported upon. Actually, Larissa Hajduk, in her master's thesis, took a group of students to Ukraine, or accompanied a group of students to Ukraine. And these students who were visiting a high school in Lviv noticed some of the differences. One being the emphasis on contests that exist in Ukraine that never existed in Canada. And what we're seeing now in Ridni Shkoly with the influence of teachers from Ukraine are more and more contests, calendar contests, art contests, contests that were never really a part of public education, not to that degree anyway, nor a part of our Ridni Shkoly system. I think you yourselves could complete this chart looking at what are the differences between public school education in Canada versus in Ukraine. And by completing this chart, you would begin to see the areas in which we are teasing out differences that may be causing some of the challenges. In summary, we see that we've got a type of Venn diagram where the Ridni Shkoly in the center are being influenced by the field of Canadian public education, the field of Ukrainian public education, and the diaspora field. And there are rules and conventions and practices that children are bringing, but are probably quicker to adapt to the Canadian ways in Canadian public Ridni Shkoly because they're experiencing Canadian public education than the teachers who are very often not teaching in public schools. So what we learned is this influence of Canadian public education on Ridni Shkoly and of Ukrainian public education on Ridni Shkoly. So what are some recommendations that we could make to this changing capital? Well, teachers from Ukraine may benefit from learning about Ukrainian Canadians, and teachers from Ukraine may contribute to increased professionalization of the Ridni Shkoly system. So we have things to learn from, or I would say both groups have things to learn from one another. This could be done through in-service professional development, which would be building community and helping to grow capital for all members of that community. Moving forward, and to return back to some of the observations from the first part of the talk, we need to have more learning resources that meet the needs of the students who now have a broader range of language competencies in the classroom. Teachers are now saying that material from Ukraine is sometimes too advanced for the kids that came only 3 years ago. We need to lower the class size because the teachers in our Ridni Shkoly system are mostly volunteers, and even if they're being paid, they're not being paid very much. And it's a lot of work to prepare for large classes, and there's fewer possibilities that could be done. So to lower the class size, we probably need an injection of more funding. We need to create benchmarks to help us assess students' abilities. And as I said, the Common European Framework of Reference exists in Ukrainian and is, I think, quite a good guide. A number of years ago, ULIC offered a workshop with Nadja Prokopchuk from the University of Saskatchewan, who has done excellent work and specialized in writing development of students using the benchmarks. We need to provide counseling for students, parents, and I think also for teachers. This is now beginning to open up. The National Ukrainian Education Committee of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress has started a seminar on Monday nights for teachers to be able to talk about trauma in their classrooms. But I think we still need to consider what the needs of teachers might be, especially with their emotional labor and the risk of burnout. We also need to publish. There's very, very little research done about Ukrainian language teaching in Canada. There are some papers and presentations that are conducted in Ukrainian, but if anyone wants to learn more about our Ukrainian schools and the adaptations, and they don't speak Ukrainian, then there's very little available to them. Ongoing teacher professional development, trauma-informed workshops, as I've mentioned, SEFR standards, new resources for children. Don't forget to sign up for our webinars. In conclusion, the shift that's taking place is not only one of language, but also of identity within and toward the community. Many feel that newcomers do not understand, respect, or show interest in what previous waves have created. Some are not comfortable sending their children to community organizations because their Ukrainian is different. And this is something that the teachers who are othering, this is actually what they're saying, is that their Ukrainian is different. Now, some people, sociologists, would say, well, this is not a new phenomenon. The post-World War II immigration made a lot of changes in the Ukrainian community to the first and second waves of immigration. Same could be said of those who came immediately after 1991. The difference is, I think, that this is a more critical time. The numbers are different, and the people that have come this time often speak English, so they don't rely on the community in the same way. We don't want to lose them as a part of the Ukrainian community, nor do we want to lose the families whose children have were a part of the Ridni Shkoly system, but now feel like they have been othered. Another change is that we've definitely moved from ethnic thinking to diasporic thinking. So by ethnic thinking, Ford and Kelly say ethnicity is most commonly used as a social political construct. It includes shared origin, shared language, and shared cultural traditions. A diaspora, in contrast, is an ethnic group, but it also includes an emphasis on the retention of linkages with the home nation for a variety of reasons. I'm just mindful of the time and thinking that it's probably time to share. Thank you very much. Questions or comments? Дякую, дякую. I don't think I can render people speechless. Oksana.
I think I will start. First of all, Olenka, thank you so much. I think that much of the information you've given is food for thought. And I think most of us don't have questions because we're thinking and trying to process and trying to come to an understanding of it. I think for me, the most interesting thing at this point is the contrast that you have emphasized and the way you've put them into theoretical frameworks about the differences in education systems and how this is impacting on. Now, I'm not going to get wait a minute. Pierre Bourdieu. I will look him up and I will do a little bit more research on him. But I think it's fascinating that at a subliminal level, we accept these things or not accept these things. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for also emphasizing the trauma that children and their parents and their mothers have gone through. Just a reminder to everybody, Alberta Teachers Association did a very good reference book at the beginning of when children first started entering the school system in Alberta, but it is available online. It's available to everybody. And there is quite a good section there on trauma and relating it to the historical context of Ukraine. So if anybody's dealing, it is in English, of course, but if anybody's dealing with it, it is available, and I would highly recommend that. I also find it fascinating, and you're right, that there is very little research analysis of the teaching of Ukrainian in Canada as a rule. I've come across this when I speak with my colleagues in Ukraine. They know nothing about it. And the reason they know nothing about it is because we haven't written enough about it. So yes, that's definitely another challenge. And thank you for bringing that up. And the fourth thing that I'd like to emphasize is the differences in teaching literacy skills. I don't think this is the forum to talk about this, but definitely the approach to literacy, both math and reading and listening and writing abilities, is very different in Ukraine than it is in Canada. And it is also something that we all need to look at, compare, and work within frameworks to come to a better understanding of it, because it's important. So thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure. I have all kinds of questions in my mind, but I need to work on them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oksana. And I know this is the second time you've heard the first half. So I'm really glad you could join and learn a bit more about Bourdieu. And hopefully, we'll have more seminars to discuss this interaction between two fields of education.
Olenka,
Proszę.
this is Alexander. I have a question. The difference between all of the waves that we have and with the wave that happened after World War II and the wave that happened after 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, this is the presence of the technologies. This is the connection that those people that have immigrated and that have settled in Canada after the full-scale invasion, this is their connection with Ukraine. That it wasn't actually the case, and that the integration is much harder just because how we experiencing what is happening in Ukraine. And the level of literacy, we are speaking about language literacy, but also of media literacy, just because that is also really crucial when it comes to our psychological and also like mental health that was not actually the case in the past because we were not aware of what was happening in Ukraine after like under the occupation when Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union, but right now it is also the part. How do you think actually we can address like particularly those who are in education that aspect also of media literacy in and also maybe to overcome that burden that also brings to adjust to a new environment?
Good question. I would say, first of all, that within the field of education, public education, and I'll speak just for Canada for a moment, at least every 10 years, you see major curriculum changes. And within that 10-year period, the new innovations, whether they're from technology or social issues that have emerged, always become integrated into the new curriculum. And so disinformation, misinformation is relatively new on such a wide scale basis. And what you see now already within public educations is discussions about this and the integration of the need to help students recognize the difference between information, disinformation, misinformation. Now, simultaneously, if we look back 10 years ago, we have teachers who were very excited about integrating technology into all of their teaching. They were happy when students had their cell phones and they could give them assignments and tasks. And now the evolution of technology is such that in many, many places, not only in Canada, but around the world, children check their cell phone at the door of the school before they are allowed to enter class. So there have been so many changes in technology, and I think that it is becoming recognized within curriculum, and that then will filter down to Ridni Shkoly, for example, and the community and the future of the nation, really.
Yeah, yeah. But sorry, what I observed actually, those narratives that really rich ethnographical data you collected in your research, but also in my ethnographical also research, which is particularly online, I see really like huge similarities about how it is actually described that tension that we have. And the question is where actually that tension started. It started online or it started actually in the class. So, and then, so this is also really interesting. The
Yeah, that is interesting. I wouldn't. Um, what I like about Bourdieu's theory is the idea that it's happening without us being aware of it.
yeah,
Um, and so that's what makes it so hard to identify a single starting point. And I think some of the tensions always happen when you have newcomers to a community
Yeah.
post-World War II. And then you had immigrants that came from Poland and Eastern Europe, Ukrainians entering into our community. And then you had post-1991. And each of those groups, of course, has many similarities. That's why they find their place into the community. But they also have distinct differences, which is why they sometimes create their own organizations within the community. They need to feel the habitus from home as they are adjusting to a new and emerging habitus.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm mindful of the time. It was scheduled only for 1 hour. Thank you all for staying. I'm grateful that you think this is an important topic. And I thank Oksana for, reminding me that people are thinking. It's not that they have nothing to say. Please feel free to write in the chat. Maria will Maria, I think there's a link for feedback. And anything else, Maria?
Oh, no, you can find the link. It's already in the chat. Yeah. So thank you.
And
Thank
please
you
watch
all.
for our seminars in 2026. Okay.
Thank you.
Дякую, до побачення.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Дякую.